What if a simple shift at a roadside diner became a moment that would shatter a waitress's world forever? When Maria refused to compromise her dignity for a cruel customer, she never imagined being forced to her knees by the most feared Mafia boss in the city. The restaurant fell silent as his cold eyes studied her trembling hands, but beneath her fingertips lay a small faded tattoo that would transform this moment of ultimate humiliation into the beginning of a truth buried for 25 years. Some marks on our skin tell stories more powerful than we know. Maria Matthews wiped condensation from her forehead with the back of her wrist as she balanced 3 plates of steaming diner food along her arm, a skill perfected over 15 years of serving at the Blue Plate Special. The smell of burnt coffee and grease hung in the air, clinging to her faded uniform that had once been sky blue, but now resembled the colour of a rainy day. Outside, the south side of Chicago displayed its familiar tapestry of struggle, dollar stores with barred windows flanking check-cashing outlets, where dreams went to be converted into just enough to make it through another week. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting sickly shadows across the worn linoleum, matching the stuttering hope in Mariah's heart as she mentally calculated the tips stuffed into her apron pocket against the prescription waiting at Walgreens for her son Elijah. His asthma medication cost $87 with insurance, nearly a full shift of smiles she forced through clenched teeth whenever businessmen from downtown snapped their fingers to summon her like a trained animal. She slid the plates in front of a group of suits whose conversation never paused as they took up her table for 3 hours on $6 worth of coffee refills. Maria noticed the elderly woman at table 7 shivering slightly, her thin cardigan inadequate against the broken heating system, and quietly adjusted the thermostat despite the manager's constant reminders about utility costs. Small kindnesses were all she had to give most days, but she offered them generously, whether through the extra pancake she snuck onto the plate of the homeless man who counted pennies for breakfast, or the genuine way she remembered the names and stories of regular customers who often spoke to no one else all day. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. The school nurse again, probably saying Elijah's inhaler was empty. News that would require juggling which bill would be sacrificed this month. The weight of single motherhood pressed down on her shoulders, bent slightly after years of carrying trays and the heavier burden of raising a child alone in a neighborhood where gunshots served as irregular alarm clocks. Yet customers often commented on her smile, genuine despite everything, reaching her eyes in a way that momentarily transformed her exhausted face into something luminous and undefeated. Her co-worker Darlene often asked how she maintained such patience with rude customers, and Maria simply replied that everyone carried invisible battles, a philosophy born from a childhood she barely remembered, flashes of fear and confusion before being embraced by the woman she called mother, until cancer claimed her 5 years ago. As the evening rush subsided, Maria massaged her swollen ankles while watching headlights sweep across the rain-spotted windows, mentally preparing herself for the final 3 hours of her shift and that long bus ride home to relieve the elderly neighbour who watched Elijah for less than babysitters charged. She never allowed herself to dream of more, focusing instead on the immediate arithmetic of survival, unaware that the sleek black Cadillac now pulling into the diner's nearly empty parking lot carried inside it a past she'd forgotten and a future she couldn't imagine. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favour? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like, and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The glass door swung open with such deliberate slowness that conversations died mid-sentence. A vacuum of silence spreading across the Blue Plate Special as 5 men in tailored Italian suits entered like a dark tide washing over the worn linoleum floor. Even the clatter of forks against ceramic plates ceased as regular customers suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating, eyes downcast to avoid witnessing whatever was about to unfold. At their centre walked Vincent Caruso, a man whose name appeared in hushed whispers on local news whenever bodies were discovered in the Chicago River, his silver-templed confidence radiating the casual menace of someone who had never faced consequences for his actions. Maria felt her chest tighten as the group moved with predatory precision toward the corner booth with best view of both entrances, a space always reserved though no sign indicated its importance. The overhead lights seemed to dim in their presence, as if the electricity itself feared drawing their attention, while the scent of expensive cologne cut through the greasy diner air like a switchblade. Vincent unbuttoned his cashmere overcoat with manicured fingers adorned by a gold signet ring that caught the light when he gestured for his 4 lieutenants to sit. Each man scanning the room with cold calculation before settling into the red vinyl seats still warm from the previous occupants who had vacated without finishing their apple pie. Darlene froze beside the register, her trembling hands clutching menus she clearly had no intention of delivering, leaving Maria to step forward on legs suddenly weighted with concrete understanding of her vulnerability in this moment. She approached their table with professional courtesy stretched thin across her features, pitcher of ice water in hand as Vincent assessed her, with eyes that seemed to measure the precise value of every human they encountered. The pitcher trembled slightly as she leaned forward to fill the first glass, her elbow accidentally brushing against Vincent's sleeve, causing water to splash across the immaculate cuff of his shirt. Time crystallized into a moment of perfect dread as droplets soaked into Italian cotton worth more than her monthly rent, his expression shifting from surprise to something reptilian and pleased, as if her mistake had satisfied some expectation. Vincent languidly reached for his napkin before deliberately knocking his fork to the floor, where it landed with a metallic accusation against her competence. His eyes never left hers as the corners of his mouth curled upward, less a smile than the warning display of a predator revealing its teeth. No words were necessary as his expectation hung in the air between them, the unspoken command that she should kneel to retrieve it humming with the electric certainty that this small performance was a test with dangerous consequences for failure. Maria felt every eye in the diner upon her, including the cook peering through the service window, and Darlene now frozen by the coffee maker, all witnesses to this microscopic power struggle that suddenly contained the entirety of her dignity within its borders. Her hand closed reflexively around the small inhaler in her pocket, her lifeline to Elijah becoming the stake in a game she never agreed to play. Something hardened in Mariah's spine as she looked down at the silver fork glinting on the scuffed floor tiles, a small rebellion kindling behind her ribs that surprised her with its sudden ferocity. She stared directly into Vincent's expectant eyes, her voice emerging with unexpected steadiness, as she replied that she would bring him a clean utensil instead, the words hanging in the air like a gauntlet thrown at the feet of a man unaccustomed to defiance. The temperature in the diner seemed to plummet as Vincent slowly unfolded himself from the booth, rising to his full intimidating height mere inches from where she stood clutching her serving tray like a flimsy shield. His presence expanded to fill the space between them, cologne mingling with the metallic scent of fear now radiating from every corner of the restaurant, as phones disappeared into pockets and gazes fixed on tabletops, bystanders transforming themselves into furniture rather than witnesses, the ceiling lights reflected in Vincent's obsidian eyes as he leaned forward, close enough that Maria could see the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, his whispered words carrying clearly through the preternatural silence. "You don't understand who I am, do you?" The question slithered through the air, not seeking information, but delivering a verdict on her ignorance, his breath warm against her face as his hand shot out with viper speed to encircle her wrist. His grip locked around her bones like a manacle of flesh and expensive cologne, effortlessly controlling her smaller frame as he began applying downward pressure with the patient certainty of someone who had never been refused. Maria felt her knees beginning to bend against her will, her body betraying her spirit as the physical reality of his strength overwhelmed her resistance, the worn linoleum rising to meet her as if gravity itself had intensified around her, failing defiance. Tears of humiliation gathered along her lashes, blurring the watchful faces of Vincent's men into smears of pale amusement as her free hand splayed against the floor for balance, her fingertips pressing into sticky residue from countless spilled sodas. Just before her knees touched ground, Vincent froze, his attention suddenly fixed on the space between her thumb and index finger, where a small crescent moon tattoo, faded to pale blue with age, peeked out from beneath the fluorescent lights. The pressure on her wrist vanished, as if a switch had been flipped, his expression transforming from cruel satisfaction to shocked recognition in the space between heartbeats. Blood drained from his face with such startling swiftness that for a moment Maria thought he might collapse, his complexion ashen beneath his expensive tan as he stared at the small mark as if seeing a ghost materialize before him. His lieutenants shifted uncomfortably in the booth, confusion rippling across their features at the inexplicable change in their leader's demeanour. Their certainty about the scripts of power and submission suddenly undermined by whatever significance that small inked crescent held in Vincent's widening pupils. Vincent released Maria so abruptly she stumbled backward against the empty table behind her. Water pitcher clutched to her chest like a talisman, as his eyes remained fixed on her hand with an intensity that seemed to burn through her skin to the bone beneath. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling the entire diner as his finger pointed at the small crescent moon tattoo, with a tremor visible only to those closest to him. The room held its collective breath, witness to a script suddenly veering wildly from its expected ending, the power dynamic shifting in ways no one understood but everyone recognized. Larry, the manager, emerged from behind the counter, with hands raised in placating surrender, his voice overly bright as he offered complimentary meals to smooth over whatever transgression had occurred, but Vincent silenced him with a single glacial glance that sent the man retreating like a turtle into its shell. Maria stared down at her own hand as if seeing the faded blue crescent for the first time, confusion evident in the furrow between her brows as she explained she had always had it. A marking from early childhood she could not remember receiving, but had carried through foster homes and her eventual adoption at age 7. Something flickered across Vincent's face at her words, recognition and disbelief wrestling beneath the surface of his composed features as he slowly removed his left glove to reveal an identical crescent moon tattoo nestled in the same position between his thumb and forefinger. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken significance as his lieutenants exchanged glances loaded with speculation, their earlier amusement curdling into uncertain vigilance. Without breaking eye contact, Vincent extracted a leather wallet from his interior pocket, removed a crisp stack of $100 bills that he placed deliberately beside his untouched water glass, then laid a heavy cream business card atop the money, the gold-embossed name catching light as his fingertip pressed it firmly against the table. "Call this number tomorrow morning," he instructed, his voice carrying a strange mix of command and plea that seemed foreign to the muscles of his face. "I have questions only you can answer." The implied power in his tone brooked no refusal, yet contained something else entirely. A vulnerability so unexpected it felt more threatening than his earlier cruelty. Maria nodded mutely, unable to process the surreal shift from near assault to this charged moment of connection she neither understood nor trusted. As Vincent buttoned his coat with hands no longer entirely steady, he paused to look back at her one final time, his gaze travelling from her face to her hand and back again, eyes filled with ghosts Maria could not see, but somehow recognized in the hollow of her chest where forgotten memories sometimes stirred like distant thunder. The blue glow of her cracked laptop screen illuminated Maria's face as she hunched at her tiny kitchen table, the business card propped against a salt shaker, while Elijah's gentle snores drifted from behind the thin wall separating their rooms in the 2-bedroom apartment that smelled perpetually of the neighbours' cooking. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed Vincent Caruso's name into the search bar, throat tightening with each headline that appeared linking him to suspected criminal enterprises across Chicago. Articles detailing his rise from street enforcer to the head of one of the city's most feared organizations. 3 cups of tepid tea accumulated beside her keyboard as the night deepened, her eyes burning as she scrolled through decades of newspaper mentions, pausing at a small article from 25 years ago reporting the disappearance of Angela Caruso and her infant daughter following a warehouse shooting that left 3 men dead. The piece mentioned Vincent's tireless search for his missing sister and niece, with anonymous sources claiming he still pursued leads decades later despite presumed evidence they had not survived. Maria unconsciously rubbed the space between her thumb and index finger, the small crescent moon tattoo barely visible in the laptop's dim light as she tilted her hand toward the bathroom mirror, studying the faded blue lines that had always been part of her skin landscape. Sudden flashes of memory surfaced like debris after a storm, disconnected images of warm hands holding hers, a woman's voice singing soft Italian lullabies about moonbeams and starlight, the smell of cinnamon and something citrus vanishing before she could grasp their meaning. She glanced toward the kitchen counter where Elijah's empty inhaler lay beside the refill prescription they couldn't afford, next to past due notices from the electric company and the letter from their landlord warning of an impending rent increase. Her son's wheezing cough punctuated the silence, the familiar rattle in his chest tightening something primal in her own, the weight of her inability to protect him from either poverty or illness, pressing against her ribs until breathing felt like pushing against stone. The cream business card seemed to glow under the kitchen's fluorescent bulb, expensive and official with its raised golden text promising access to resources she desperately needed. A lifeline thrown across dangerous waters she would brave for Elijah's sake if nothing else. Before doubt could crystallize into paralysis, Maria reached for her phone and punched in the number, each digit a small surrender to desperation as the clock on the microwave blinked 3:17 a.m., too late for social calls but perhaps the perfect hour for bargains with the devil. As the phone began to ring, she pressed her thumb against the crescent moon, some instinct telling her this small blue mark somehow connected her to answers about a past she could not remember, but suddenly feared she was about to discover, for better or worse. The gleaming black Mercedes arrived at Maria's apartment building before dawn, its polished surface reflecting the flickering streetlight like a pool of oil against the cracked sidewalk where children normally played hopscotch with chalk stolen from school. She slipped inside, the buttery leather seat swallowing her thin frame as the driver navigated through progressively wealthier neighborhoods, concrete and graffiti giving way to manicured lawns and iron gates, until they arrived at a limestone mansion rising from manicured grounds like a mountain of privilege. Her worn sneakers sank into plush carpets worth more than her yearly salary, as a silent housekeeper guided her through rooms larger than her entire apartment, past crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across walls adorned with artwork she recognized from museum posters in Elijah's textbooks. Vincent waited in a wood-panelled study smelling of leather and expensive cigars, standing before a fireplace large enough to consume her kitchen table, his tailored casualness somehow more intimidating than the previous night's aggression. The room hummed with old wealth and quiet power, bookshelves climbing toward coffered ceilings, while silver-framed photographs covered an entire wall in a constellation of family history, faces with familiar strong jawlines and aquiline noses staring out from celebrations and holidays spanning generations. Vincent gestured toward a wing chair across from his own, the space between them bisected by firelight as he silently removed his signet ring and rolled up his sleeve to reveal the crescent moon tattoo matching her own. "This mark is a Caruso family tradition," he explained, his voice unexpectedly soft as his finger traced the blue lines etched into his skin. "A birthmark every family member has tattooed soon after birth, a practice dating back to Sicily when children needed identification if separated during immigration or poverty." Maria felt the room tilt sideways as Vincent lifted a silver frame from his desk, holding it toward her with hands less steady than they had been in the diner. The photograph showed a young woman with Maria's own eyes and determined chin, cradling an infant wrapped in a white blanket, a small bandage visible on the baby's tiny hand where the crescent moon would permanently mark her as family. "My sister Angela and her daughter disappeared 25 years ago after witnessing something they should never have seen," Vincent continued, voice cracking slightly as he described the warehouse execution Angela had stumbled upon while dropping off lunch for her husband, who managed Caruso's shipping interests. The police investigation suggested both mother and child had been killed to eliminate witnesses, though their bodies were never recovered despite Vincent's relentless searching, his resources deployed for decades following every possible lead, until this moment when a waitress with the Caruso chin and moon tattoo appeared before him like a ghost made flesh. The wood in the fireplace settled with a crack as Vincent leaned forward, eyes searching Mariah's face for confirmation of what the matching tattoos already told him. The question hanging between them, weighted with 25 years of grief and hope as outside the study windows. Dawn light began filtering through trees worth more than everything Maria had ever owned. Sophia Caruso resided in the east wing of the mansion, her suite filled with golden afternoon light and the scent of rosewater that clung to her silk blouse as she rose from her armchair when Maria entered, her weathered hands trembling like autumn leaves in wind. The elderly woman moved with surprising swiftness across priceless Persian carpets, her fingers cool against Maria's cheeks as she tilted the younger woman's face toward the light, tears spilling unchecked down papery skin as she whispered, Angela's name like a prayer finally answered. The family resemblance bloomed under her touch, the same high cheekbones and determined chin, even the small mole near the left eyebrow that Sophia traced with reverent fingertips while Vincent stood sentinel by the doorway, his customary hardness softened by the reunion he had pursued across decades of false leads and empty graves. The DNA test results arrived 3 days later during a rainfall that washed Chicago streets clean. Scientific confirmation of what blood had always known. The genetic markers linking Maria irrefutably to the Caruso lineage as Vincent unfolded the paper with hands steadier than his voice when he officially welcomed his niece home from the dead. The family celebration overflowed from the mansion's formal dining room, where crystal goblets caught candlelight like liquid fiat. Cousins Maria had never known embracing her with kisses scented with wine and acceptance. Uncles pressing heavy gold jewellery into her palms, as if making up for 25 missed birthdays in a single night. Yet unease settled in Maria's stomach alongside truffled pasta, when conversation turned casually to business rivals who had recently disappeared, her newfound family discussing violence with the same comfortable familiarity others might discuss baseball scores or weather forecasts. Vincent noticed her discomfort with the predator's instinct for weakness, drawing her into his study where family photographs now included a framed picture of Elijah from her wallet, his asthma inhaler airbrushed away by someone skilled at erasing inconvenient details. "Your son will never want for anything again," Vincent promised as he opened a leather portfolio containing documents with her true name, Maria Lucia Caruso, birth certificate and trust fund papers revealing an inheritance large enough to make her momentarily lightheaded, with its implications for Elijah's future. Medical specialists, private schools, opportunities for stretching toward horizons previously invisible from their apartment window, all presented alongside keys to a penthouse overlooking the lake. The weight of brass in her palm, heavier than the diner trays she would never carry again. "The Caruso family protects its own," Vincent assured her, his hand covering the crescent moon tattoo on hers in a gesture both comforting and claiming, while through the study window she glimpsed men loading unmarked crates into expensive cars, the source of the security now being offered, visible in their efficient movements and concealed weapons catching sunlight as they prepared to deliver something untraceable to unknown destinations. Roberto Falcone watched Maria from across the Caruso family Sunday dinner through narrowed eyes that missed nothing, his fork moving mechanically between plate and mouth while his mind calculated odds and angles with the precision that had elevated him from street collector to Vincent's most trusted lieutenant over 15 years of brutal efficiency. Unlike the others who embraced the miraculous return of the lost Caruso heir, Roberto saw convenient timing and suspicious perfection in a waitress who appeared precisely when the FBI had increased pressure on their operations, his instincts honed by survival's screaming warnings beneath the violins and laughter filling the mansion's dining room. While Maria learned her family history through Sophia's stories, Roberto assembled a team to investigate every fragment of her past, paying cash for sealed adoption records and school reports, photographing the contents of her apartment while she attended an opera with her newfound cousins, her entire life dissected under his scrutiny like a specimen pinned to velvet. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when his sources discovered Maria Matthews had been adopted by Eleanor Matthews, whose first husband Thomas Keller had turned informant for the Chicago PD in 2001 before his convenient disappearance during a fishing trip in Michigan. His body never recovered, but his testimony buried in sealed indictments against minor Caruso associates. Roberto presented this information to Vincent in the secure basement office, where real business occurred, photographs and documents spread across the mahogany desk like playing cards in a game of high-stakes poker, his voice reasonable yet firm as he suggested what Vincent refused to see, that Maria might be part of an elaborate trap years in the making, placed close enough to gather evidence against the family that had eluded prosecution for generations. Vincent dismissed his concerns with uncharacteristic emotion, pointing to DNA results that Roberto suggested could be falsified, their argument ending with a warning that doubting Maria meant doubting Vincent himself, a line Roberto recognized as dangerous to cross but necessary for the organization's survival. That night, Roberto activated surveillance protocols reserved for federal investigations, black sedans with tinted windows parking within sight of Maria's new penthouse, tiny cameras installed in smoke detectors, and light fixtures capturing her movements through luxury spaces she explored like a tourist in a foreign country. Most disturbing to Roberto was how she kept her son Elijah separate from family gatherings, declining Vincent's offers to enroll him in the private academy attended by Caruso children for generations, instead maintaining his routine at the public school, where Roberto now had men photographing the boys' schedule and friendships, mapping patterns and weaknesses with professional detachment while searching for proof of Maria's treachery or evidence of federal connections. Roberto understood patience in hunting, having once waited 17 days for a business jet rival to emerge from hiding, knowing Maria would eventually make a mistake or reveal her true purpose if he watched long enough. His loyalty to the Caruso family motivating actions that Vincent would initially condemn but eventually thank him for when the danger was exposed and eliminated before it could destroy everything they had built together. The penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan gleamed with marble and glass, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows onto furniture Maria still hesitated to sit on, afraid her past might somehow stain the pristine fabrics that cost more than a year's salary at the diner. Vincent insisted on handling every detail of their transition, from hiring specialists who immediately adjusted Elijah's medication regimen to eliminate his asthma attacks to arranging private transportation to Lakeside Academy, where her son now studied alongside children of senators and CEOs. Elijah bloomed under proper care, his thin frame filling out as he discovered tennis and debate club, yet his questions grew more pointed with each passing week, especially regarding Uncle Vincent, who appeared unannounced with extravagant gifts and vague explanations about their sudden change in fortune. Family dinner invitations arrived on heavy cream cardstock, each acceptance pulling Maria deeper into the Caruso orbit of wealth and power until the night she observed Vincent transform during dessert when a business associate mentioned shipment delays affecting their interests at the harbour. The conversation shifted into Italian, but Maria's recently discovered fluency in her native tongue revealed Vincent's casual threat to visit the man's children at their boarding school in Switzerland, if problems persisted. The words delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes while he passed tiramisu around the table without breaking rhythm. The man's face drained of colour as he nodded rapid agreement, understanding passing between them that required no translation regardless of language, the implicit violence beneath the civilized veneer suddenly visible to Maria like a skull beneath skin. Later that week, Vincent summoned her to the downtown offices of Caruso Imports, leading her through floors of legitimate business operations to a private elevator requiring his fingerprint, descending to underground levels where accounting ledgers revealed the true source of family wealth flowing through shell companies and offshore accounts. The family needs someone trustworthy to oversee our legitimate enterprises, Vincent explained while offering her control of their real estate holdings and restaurant chains, a position commanding 7 figures annually with the implied understanding that she would ask no questions about certain properties or cash, heavy businesses functioning primarily to launder money from less acceptable ventures. The proposal lay between them like a test of blood loyalty versus moral conviction. Her newfound financial security and Elijah's promising future weighed against complicity in an empire built on others' suffering, the crescent moon tattoo on her hand suddenly feeling less like a birthright and more like a brand as Vincent waited for her answer with the patience of someone accustomed to eventually getting whatever he wanted. Vincent summoned Maria to the Blue Plate Special after midnight. The diner closed and darkened save for a single light above their booth, the familiar setting transformed into something menacing, by emptiness and shadows stretching across sticky floors. Her blood froze as he slid photographs across the table, images of her meeting with a man Vincent identified as FBI, time-stamped conversations she recognized as innocent encounters with Elijah's school counselor now twisted into evidence of betrayal through selective framing and context removal. The warmth that had characterized his treatment since discovering their connection vanished completely, replaced by the cold calculation she had witnessed only from a distance until now, directed at enemies rather than family. As he questioned how long she had worked with authorities, whether she had worn a wire to family functions, if her miraculous appearance had been orchestrated to infiltrate his organization. Genuine confusion rendered Maria temporarily speechless, her mind racing to understand accusations that made no sense until a floorboard creaked near the kitchen, and she glimpsed Roberto, partially hidden behind the service window, watching the confrontation with the satisfied expression of an architect seeing his design perfectly executed. The realization crystallized with sudden clarity. Roberto's jealousy of her instant elevation within family hierarchy, his whispered warnings to cousins about trusting too quickly, his constant presence whenever she accessed family properties, all culminating in this manufactured evidence presented to Vincent when his lieutenant knew the boss would be most vulnerable. Maria began explaining the true context of each photograph, desperation mounting as Vincent's expression remained impassive, his fingers drumming against the tabletop where weeks earlier he had noticed her crescent moon tattoo, that connection now insufficient against Roberto's carefully constructed narrative of betrayal. The diner door suddenly swung open, fluorescent lights flickering to life as Elijah entered, confusion evident on his face as he sought his mother after finding the penthouse empty. The security team, usually monitoring their movements, conspicuously absent after following Roberto's orders to stand down temporarily. Vincent's attention snapped to the teenage boy, noticing for the first time the antique silver locket hanging from a chain around his neck, recognition flickering across his features as Elijah explained he had worn his mother's childhood treasure for his debate competition. Good luck from his grandmother, who had rescued the necklace along with infant Maria from the burning car, meant to eliminate all evidence of Angela Caruso and her child. Vincent reached for the locket with uncharacteristically gentle hands, clicking open the clasp to reveal a tiny photograph of Angela holding baby Maria, identical to the one in his study, but with a crucial difference visible only to family, the small burn mark on the paper's edge matching perfectly to the original Vincent kept in his wallet, a detail impossible to replicate without access to the source material Roberto had never seen. Vincent's face transformed into something ancient and terrible as he closed the locket with reverent fingers, his whispered command sending his men to secure the perimeter, while he made a single phone call that mobilized the full Caruso security apparatus within minutes. Black SUVs materialized outside the diner, armed men creating a protective corridor through which Maria and Elijah were whisked into the Chicago night. Mother and son separated from Vincent, who remained behind to address the Roberto situation with the cold efficiency that had built his empire. The safe house sat nestled against Wisconsin forest 3 hours from the city, a rustic exterior concealing state-of-the-art security systems and reinforced panic rooms beneath log cabin aesthetics. Their protector introduced himself simply as Eduardo, a weathered Latino man with military precision in his movements and kind eyes that contradicted the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. As Elijah slept upstairs, exhausted from the midnight flight from danger, Eduardo revealed his true identity over steaming coffee at the kitchen table, explaining that 25 years ago he had been Officer Eduardo Vega, the rookie detective assigned to investigate the disappearance of Angela Caruso and her infant daughter. His voice grew tight as he described finding evidence of their survival, but watching the case deliberately buried by superiors receiving Caruso money, the official report claiming Angela and her child had died in the warehouse incident despite Eduardo uncovering witness accounts of a young mother fleeing with her baby. The corruption extended through multiple levels of Chicago law enforcement, his evidence vanishing from lockup, witnesses recanting after unexplained financial windfalls, his persistent questions earning him exile to record-keeping until he made a decision that altered his life path, approaching Vincent Caruso directly with what he knew. Instead of finding the monster Eduardo expected, he discovered a brother tormented by his missing sister, forming an unlikely alliance that placed Eduardo undercover within the Caruso organization for 2 decades, working from inside to find Angela while subtly steering Vincent toward legitimate business interests and away from the violence that defined their father's generation. The photograph in the locket matched fragments Eduardo had preserved from the original case file, confirming Maria was indeed the missing Caruso heir while raising new questions about who had orchestrated the original attempt on Angela's life. Suspects including Roberto, whose father had competed with Vincent for control of the organization before his convenient suicide. Maria's world tilted on its axis as Eduardo explained how Vincent had gradually withdrawn from direct criminal involvement under his influence, maintaining the ruthless reputation necessary for survival while secretly building an exit strategy from illegitimate enterprises, a transformation accelerated by Maria's miraculous appearance and the possibility of redemption she represented. Dawnlight filtered through the bulletproof windows as Maria absorbed how her existence had been shaped by forces she never imagined, her identity formed in the negative space of secrets and corruption that suddenly contextualized both her past and her possible futures. The attack came at 3:17 in the morning, security alarms blaring as Roberto and 8 men breached the perimeter using access codes that should have been impossible to obtain, proving how deeply his betrayal ran within the Caruso organization. Glass shattered as bullets perforated windows despite their reinforced design, Eduardo shoving Maria and Elijah toward the panic room, even as he returned fire with methodical precision that dropped 2 attackers before they cleared the front porch. Something awakened in Maria's blood as bullets splintered wood inches from her son's head, ancient instincts of protection transcending her conscious mind as she pulled a fallen guard's weapon into her steady hands, the weight familiar as if her body remembered skills her mind had forgotten. She positioned herself between danger and Elijah, coordinating wordlessly with Eduardo to create interlocking fields of fear that prevented Roberto's men from advancing down the hallway, her accuracy surprising everyone including herself as she wounded an attacker attempting to flank their position. Elijah displayed the same innate calm under pressure, following instructions perfectly while retrieving ammunition from a hidden compartment Eduardo directed him to, the family resemblance evident in crisis as 3 generations of Caruso blood refused to surrender to fear. The standoff intensified until headlights swept across the safehouse grounds, Vincent arriving with reinforcements that immediately shifted the tactical balance, his voice cutting through gunfire with commands that sent his loyal soldiers executing a pincer movement against Roberto's dwindling forces. Maria caught Vincent's expression as he entered through a rear entrance, his momentary surprise at finding her defending rather than hiding, transforming into something like pride before the professional mask of the boss reasserted itself. Roberto, recognizing his plan collapsing, executed a desperate maneuver by circling through the crawl space beneath the house, emerging suddenly behind Elijah and dragging the boy into the open kitchen with a gun pressed against his temple, wild eyes darting between Vincent and Maria as he backed toward the rear exit. His ultimatum echoed through the now silent safehouse, demanding Vincent publicly disavow Maria's family, sign over controlling interests in their most profitable territories, and provide safe passage out of the country, his desperation evident in the sweat dripping down his face onto Elijah's shoulder. Vincent stood utterly still in the doorway, weapon pointed at his once trusted lieutenant, while Roberto tightened his grip on Elijah, reminding his boss that without Roberto the organization would collapse, informants would surface, and 20 years of careful empire building would disintegrate into federal indictments and asset seizures. The moment crystallized into perfect clarity as Vincent weighed decades of power against the terrified eyes of the nephew he had only just discovered. The choice between the criminal empire that defined his identity and the family connection he had sought for 25 years, his finger steady on the trigger, while Roberto sneered about sentimentality being weakness in their business, a judgment that failed to recognize how completely priorities had shifted since a crescent moon tattoo had appeared in a downtown diner. The weapon in Vincent's hand lowered toward the floor in a gesture so unexpected that Roberto blinked in momentary confusion, creating the microsecond of distraction Maria had been waiting for since Eduardo had whispered instructions during the firefight. Her body moved with fluid precision as she executed the defensive maneuver, stepping into Roberto's space rather than away, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus, while her opposite hand simultaneously trapped his gun arm and twisted with leverage that sent white-hot pain shooting through his wrist. The weapon clattered to the hardwood as Elijah ducked away from loosened fingers, Roberto stumbling backward into the waiting security personnel who subdued him with professional efficiency, while Maria gathered her son into fierce embrace, her heart hammering against his as Vincent watched the scene unfold with an expression of profound revelation. Morning light filtered through bullet-shattered windows as Vincent surveyed the destruction surrounding them. Bodies of men loyal to both sides sprawled across antique rugs and polished floors, blood seeping into wood grain that would never come clean no matter how thoroughly scrubbed. Something fundamental shifted behind his eyes as he holstered his weapon and approached Maria and Elijah, his hand gently touching the silver locket, still hanging around his nephew's neck, recognition dawning that his lifetime pursuit of power had nearly destroyed the very family he had spent decades searching for. 3 days later in a federal building downtown, Vincent Caruso sat across from prosecutors and FBI agents, his attorney presenting terms that stunned career law enforcement officials who had pursued the organization for generations without success. In exchange for complete immunity for Maria and lifetime protection for Elijah, Vincent offered himself and detailed records of criminal enterprises spanning 4 decades, names of corrupted officials purchased through campaign contributions, locations of evidence previously thought destroyed, and access to offshore accounts containing millions in untraceable funds. The prosecution team whispered among themselves, unable to believe the notorious crime boss would sacrifice his freedom and empire willingly, until Vincent rolled up his sleeve to reveal the crescent moon tattoo, explaining how finding his sister's child had shown him the true cost of the life he had built. each act of violence creating ripples that eventually threatened the very people he claimed to protect. Maria visited him before his transfer to federal custody, separated by the bulletproof glass as Vincent explained his choice with unexpected peace in his voice, telling her that in protecting Elijah, he had finally honoured Angela's memory properly, the circle completing as he ensured her child would grow up without the shadow of violence that had defined their family for generations. The crescent moon tattoos on their hands pressed against opposite sides of the glass, Vincent expressing hope that Elijah might someday understand his uncle had finally chosen the right kind of power, not the ability to control others through fear, but the strength to sacrifice himself for those he loved. The pristine halls of the Caruso Foundation for Community Renewal gleamed under sustainable lighting, the former import company headquarters now transformed into a buzzing hub, where former criminal enterprises had been methodically converted into legitimate operations funding educational scholarships, addiction recovery programs, and small business grants across South Side neighborhoods, where hope previously struggled to take root. Maria moved through the space with quiet authority, her business attire a far cry from diner uniforms, but her eyes retaining the same compassionate awareness that had served her through years of balancing customer demands and tight budgets. Spring sunshine warmed her face as she cleared security at the Federal Correctional Facility where Vincent occupied a minimum security cell, his cooperation reducing his sentence substantially, while his testimony had dismantled corruption networks throughout Chicago governance, creating space for genuine reform that skeptical residents initially viewed with suspicion until results proved intentions genuine. The visitor room smelled of industrial cleaner and instant coffee, Vincent looking smaller in standard-issue khaki, yet somehow more at peace than he had appeared in tailored suits, his face brightening when Maria spread photographs across the scratched table surface, showing Elijah accepting academic awards at Lakeside Academy, where he now mentored younger students facing similar health challenges to those he had overcome. Elijah sends his regards, Maria explained while sharing details of his college applications and volunteer work at the asthma camp the foundation had established. Pride evident in her voice as she described how he had channeled his experience into compassion rather than resentment, a transformation mirroring her own journey from survival to purpose. Their hands met across the table, crescent moon tattoos aligned perfectly as Vincent absorbed stories about elderly Sophia, now serving as honorary board member for the Foundation's senior outreach program, her decades of community connections proving invaluable in identifying neighborhoods most requiring investment. Maria detailed how former Caruso properties now housed affordable medical clinics, after-school programs, and job training facilities, resources flowing back into communities previously exploited by the very organization that now sought their renewal. Vincent nodded with understanding as Maria explained her initial hesitation about using tainted money for good purposes, her eventual realization that transformation required acknowledging rather than erasing the past, the Caruso name reclaiming positive meaning through actions rather than reputation. Something like pride flickered in Vincent's eyes as he recognized how completely Maria had embraced family loyalty while redefining its meaning, protecting and nurturing their legacy by channeling its strength toward healing rather than harm. The visiting hour passed too quickly as they discussed future foundation initiatives, the connection between them transcending both blood and circumstance, proof that family bonds could survive even the most profound reckonings with truth. As guards announced time limits, Maria promised to return with more news of the Foundation's progress, both understanding that the most powerful family legacy existed not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the choice to transform darkness into light, their matching crescent moons no longer symbols of ownership, but rather enduring reminders that even the most damaged histories contained seeds of redemption when nurtured by courage and compassion. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows of the Crescent Moon Youth Center, painting golden rectangles across polished floors where 20 teenagers gathered in a circle of folding chairs, their faces reflecting various stages of wariness and hope as Maria stood before them in simple jeans and a navy blouse that spoke of accessibility rather than authority. She rolled up her sleeve with deliberate slowness, revealing the small blue crescent moon tattoo that had altered the trajectory of her life, explaining how this tiny mark had connected her to a past she never knew existed, while simultaneously offering a future she could never have imagined. The teens leaned forward as Maria shared her journey from exhausted waitress to reluctant heiress, From a woman forced to her knees to someone who stood firmly on ground of her own making, her voice steady as she described how discovering her blood connection to the Caruso family had provided resources but not identity, which she had built herself through choices rather than inheritance. At the back of the circle sat Jasmine, a 14-year-old with familiar shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of adult responsibilities shouldered too young, her skepticism evident in crossed arms and clenched jaw as Maria approached, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze at eye level, while explaining how the foundation would provide the stable housing and educational support her family needed without requiring gratitude or submission in exchange. The centre hummed with potential energy as Maria described programs designed by people who understood struggle firsthand. Her team comprised largely of Southside residents who brought lived experience to their roles as mentors and administrators, creating opportunities they wished had existed during their own challenging youths. She gestured toward the community garden visible through windows where former gang members now taught sustainable agriculture alongside culinary skills, the renovated warehouse space that once stored contraband now incubating legitimate businesses owned by neighborhood entrepreneurs, physical manifestations of the philosophy that any space or person could be transformed through deliberate choice and proper support. The scent of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the room as Maria invited the teens to imagine futures constrained only by imagination rather than circumstance, her own journey serving as living proof that moments of deepest humiliation could become foundations for redemption when courage met opportunity. As the session ended, Jasmine approached with tentative steps, reluctantly revealing her own small birthmark that had made her target for superstitious foster parents. Maria recognizing in the girl's defensive posture the same protective armor she had once worn like a second skin. She gently placed university brochures in Jasmine's hands alongside foundation scholarship applications, the moment embodying how pain could become purpose when channeled through compassion rather than vengeance. Outside the center's windows, Chicago stretched in all directions, the city where Maria had once served coffee now served by her vision of renewal. Her true inheritance not the Caruso name or fortune, but the understanding that family transcends blood when built on shared values and mutual support, her crescent moon tattoo no longer a mark of ownership but a symbol of the choices that ultimately define us.